I've been doing ministry for years, and I've seen the postmodern turn that glorifies deconstruction. Deconstruction is not necessarily a bad thing. We shouldn't be afraid of questioning things. But what has come into vogue is deconstructing everything, especially Christianity, without any desire for the reconstruction of something that is closer to the real Jesus Christ and the way of life he offers us. Again, honest doubt about what we've been taught is a good thing. In fact, it can create great spiritual growth, but doubt can also lead someone to lose their faith. Our guest today says that we can question our faith without losing it. A.J. Swoboda is assistant professor of Bible theology and world Christianity at Bushnell University. He also leads the Doctor of Ministry program around the Holy Spirit and leadership at Fuller Theological Seminary. He is the author of a number of books, including Christianity Today 2019 Book Award winner in spiritual formation, Subversive Sabbath, published by Brazos Press in 2018. His latest book is titled After Doubt, How to Question Your Faith Without Losing It, from Brazos Press. This book is a much needed assist to doubters and those of us who are seeking to help them.
Thank you for joining us, AJ. I want to roll right out of the gate and ask you, what spurred you to write a book about doubting the Christian faith?
Yeah, great question. The reality is this book, After Doubt, which is an exploration on the topic of doubt and deconstruction from a spiritual formation perspective. How do we follow Jesus through the midst of those things? Probably has its genesis in two particular experiences. One is being a college-age pastor, and for the better part of 20 years, essentially, both as a church planter and as a college-age pastor, shepherding young people, caring for the spiritual journeys of younger Christians, 18 to 25. And so you sit in the front row long enough that you start noticing the same sorts of things, and you start seeing the same sort of patterns and trajectories and questions that arise time and time again. So I think that experience really shaped my need to write on this. But I think secondarily, my own personal experiences of having a very challenging time of how to discern how to deal with doubts in my own life. And I remember in particular when I was a sophomore in college, being at a major secular university and taking a Bible class and finding out that the making of the Bible was way more complex than I had previously been told. And having this feeling of wondering, can I still trust this book? And, 20 years on, I do all the more than I did in the past. But it required me to walk through some really big questions and do so with some people that I trusted. And so I think I came out the other side and wanted to tell some stories. I wanted to show off some of my scars and how you walk through doubt and deconstruction and do it faithfully with Jesus.
Yeah, you tell stories of even having doubts because of when you did plant a church. I planted a church. So I hear how leaving that church kind of shook your world and caused all sorts of doubt as well, right?
That particular experience of stepping away from the church that we had established in Portland, a wonderful community called Theophilus that's still to this day doing remarkable work under the pastor that we had served with when we were there. He was one of our associate pastors. Really, that process completely stripped me of my identity when I transitioned from pastoral full-time work to full-time academic work as a theologian. That transition nearly killed me. My dad is a Buddhist. My dad's not a Christian, but he told me in the midst of that transition when we had stepped away from our role at the church, he talked to me about how we often build our sense of identity on what we do. And he made this comment that if you are what you do and you don't, then you aren't. My dad's not coming at this from a particularly Christian perspective, But for a Buddhist, had profound wisdom at that moment of speaking to me about my identity. And the truth is, I had built my life on my identity as a pastor rather than my identity in Jesus. And it turns out when you build your identity on anything other than Jesus, you put yourself in harm's way, because all those things will be stripped away at some point. So that was a big, the darkest season of my Christian journey was that year-long process of transitioning away from that particular assignment.
For college students, most, or young adults, it's just coming out of that time of, oh, I just believed all this. Now what do I really believe?
I serve a lot of college students still, at the university where I teach, Bushnell University in Eugene, Oregon. And the stories of some of these kids that were raised in the church, deep woundedness by Christian leaders and brothers and sisters that caused them not to. Here's what's interesting. I don't know anybody who is like stopped being a Christian because of Jesus. They stopped they stopped following Jesus because of Christians usually. I have often reflected on the parable of the prodigal son and the story, of course, that we all know quite well. The younger son sort of says to the dad, I want the inheritance. I want to run away. I want to go do my thing. He goes off, parties it up, and then there's a famine in the land and realizes, I want to come home. He comes home and has this party thrown for him. When of course the older brother is resentful and angry and jealous because the younger son is getting a party thrown for him. And I've always wondered, I've never heard anybody ever ask this question. Why did the younger son run away? Like, what was the reason and rationale that caused him to pack his bags, take the inheritance, and run? Especially in an honor culture where everything is about staying. Why did he do it? And I have come to believe, based on the response of the older brother when he does come home, that the reason he left in the first place was because of the older brother. Meaning, I don't think he wanted to be around the older brother anymore. He wanted to get out of Dodge. And for many Christians that I know, their walk away from Jesus has more to do with their relationship with the older brother than it does with the fact that the father hurt them. So that sort of church pain, that makes the older brother, and that hurts. It hurts.
Yeah. Well, some Christians like to go their merry way without questioning too much, thinking that doubt is dangerous, or that people who do question are threatening. But there are many, many of us who have major parts of our beliefs shaken. And so in the book, you make a distinction between belief and beliefs.
Yeah.
But why do you think it's important to know the difference?
Yeah, actually, I distinguish between faith and beliefs. And the reason I make that distinction is, we're told in Paul's literature that that first of all, we are saved through faith by grace. But the faith is a gift. It's a gift from God. Believing in Jesus is a gift from God. Ephesians 1 and 2. We are not saved by beliefs. We are saved through faith. Now, what are beliefs? Beliefs are statements of truth about the person that we have faith in. Let me give you an example of a belief. I believe with all my heart that God is a triune God, a community of Father, Son, and Spirit, who are co-equal and in eternal relationship and love towards one another. That's a belief statement. But if I believe the Trinity, does that mean I have faith? And the answer, of course, is no. We are told that the demons know about the deep things of God and yet have no faith in Jesus. They know great things. They know the theological truths. They have good theology. Mm-hmm. They don't have faith. I think it's important to distinguish between faith and beliefs, because you can build your life on a set of beliefs and still yet encounter in faith the living Christ. Sometimes we deconstruct. Here's the distinction. The question is, are there moments where it's okay to doubt or question the things that we believe? And I would argue it is okay, and sometimes very good, to question our beliefs, but we shouldn't doubt or deconstruct our faith. That we shouldn't question our love for Jesus. We should question our ideas.
And that is okay.
Sometimes sometimes we were handed really bad ideas about Jesus. And those ideas need to be shaken up. If we were taught from a growing up age that God, if we save ourselves for marriage and never have sex and get married to the right Christian person, we will live a perfect, harmonious, incredible, sexually fulfilling, perfect marriage. If we are told that formula, we are being set up for tremendous harm and pain because marriage is hard.
Nice.
So my point is, we need to question those beliefs. All the more have deep faith in Jesus.
One of the lines in your book that you said that that's the problem with good soil. It has the capacity to grow both vegetables and weeds. You know, we're young and we're just ready to learn and we grow, and there's vegetables, but there's weeds as well. And all of us, you know, the older I get, I'm years old, right? But the older I get, I tell people, the looser I have learned to hold my theology. Because I've seen it change so many times. I've seen my growth and decisions of, oh, I used to believe this, but now it's nuanced over here. So now I find, you know, I'm a person who likes to be right. And so I'm still pretty strong about this is what you need to believe. But then I have to catch myself and say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Am I really that sure about what I believe, these things that I believe, or am I more interested in the person in whom I trust?
Yeah, that doesn't mean I can just hear, I can hear like this little guy on my shoulder be like, yeah, but there's a danger here.
Right.
Because there is a kind of Christian spirituality out there right now that says, have faith in Jesus and don't worry about the theology. Well, I want to say, if we're going to talk about loving Jesus, which Jesus are we talking about? Are we talking about the Mormon Jesus? Are we talking about the Muslim Jesus? Are we talking about the really harsh, mean Jesus who just sends everybody away, who doesn't like which Jesus are we talking about?
It's the Jesus that wants our best life now.
I was going to say it's the KJV only Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I know you guys are joking, and I find great comedy in what you're saying. But the person who says we just need to have faith in Jesus and then says we don't need to worry about theology, I would say, if you had that relationship with your spouse, how well would that work? I love my spouse, but I don't care what she thinks. I love my spouse, but I don't know anything about her. And this is where we got to be cautious, because to have faith and intimacy with somebody, one of the signs that you love somebody is that you want to know about them. We don't have intimacy and don't worry about the theology. The good theology is a reflection of loving somebody. But good theology isn't enough. You've also got to love the person.
Right. And I feel like scripturally, it's very straightforward. Jesus makes some very bold claims. You know, he makes some very specifically about how we are to live, right? He says, if you love me, here's how you ought to live. Yep. Here are the claims I'm making for what your life should look like. Sure, there's some nuance with different ways to interpret some of that, but a lot of it is pretty universally consistent, right?
Yes, 100%. If we love Jesus, then we would do what he says. Now, I know that sounds profound, but actually that's not my language. I mean, these are the words of Jesus. If you love me, you'll do what I tell you to do. If you love me, you'll follow my commands. What Jesus is saying is, if you love me, you're going to take time to get to know what I told you to do. So it's not either or. It's not this binary of like it's intimacy and then the people with theology over here. Unfortunately, I know a ton of people that would claim to have intimacy with Jesus, but the role of scripture in their life plays almost no role. The role of the church plays no role in their journey. We desperately need to love Jesus in intimacy and take the time to get to know who God is, who he is. In the New Testament and the Old Testament, the Old Testament word for know and the New Testament word to know. In the Old Testament, it's yada. In the New Testament, it's gnosko. And in the New Testament, to know God is more of a kind of cognitive sense. You know about God, right? You know the things of God. Whereas in the Old Testament, the sense of yada is, it's not just that you know something, In Hebrew, yada, it means to know something, but it is also the same word for sexual intercourse. And there's a beautiful imagery here. And the image is that in the Old Testament, if you really know something, you know something. And I say that to say, I think the Bible invites us into that intimacy kind of knowledge and the intellect knowledge, like to know, to believe rightly and to believe and trust.
So as people are deconstructing, deconstruction in and of itself isn't the bad thing, right?
Oh, my goodness gracious, Bob. Oh, my goodness gracious. We have a word for deconstruction. When my atheist friend meets Jesus and begins to worship God and is deconstructing his layers of humanist thought, that's deconstruction. We have a word for that. It's called repentance. Deconstruction is Jesus deconstructed. You can't read Matthew 5-7 in Jesus's conversations with the Pharisees and Sadducees. Every time he says, you've heard it said, but now I say to you, he is deconstructing bad ideas about God. Martin Luther, the father of the Protestant Reformation, you can't tell me he was not deconstructing the religious tradition of his time. Deconstruction can be powerfully godly, and it can be demonic too. The difference between the two is, why are you doing it? So here's what I mean when I say that. In my book, in After Doubt, I talk about what I call healthy deconstruction and unhealthy deconstruction. And I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper here, but I am naming what I have observed are some patterns of good ways of deconstructing and patterns of not good deconstruction. And the difference between the two, if I'm in my office, which I'm in my office right here at the university, I have a couch right here for my office hours. When I have a student who comes into my office and they want to wrestle with their faith, they're struggling to believe, and they're questioning, and they're kind of they're shredding their faith apart. There are two kinds of student. There's the student who comes in my office who is just, they're questioning and they're challenging and they're pushing, but they're doing it because they love God and they want to know God. They don't want to know ideas. And so they're questioning and they're pushing and they want to know the God of the Bible. That's one student. And that, to me, when you talk about that kind of deconstruction, that's called the Christian life, of doing away with anything that gets in the way of following Jesus. But unfortunately, there's another kind of student. And the other kind of student is not sitting in my office and questioning their faith or the Bible because they want to follow Jesus. They're doing it because really, at the end of the day, more often than not, they want to sleep with who they want to sleep with. They don't want to have a book that tells them how to live their life, and they just want to be out. And the number one thing I will ask my student is, I will not ask, what are you deconstructing? I will ask, why are you deconstructing? Are you doing it because at the end of the day, you love God with all your heart? Or are you just doing it because you want to do your own thing and you're tired of having a God telling you how to live your life? And honestly, my favorite students are the ones that can just name reality and say, you know what? I'm deconstructing because I just want to do my own thing. At least that person is being honest. But a lot of people are deconstructing and saying it's about epistemic or faith structure things, when in reality, I wonder if more often than not, we want to do our own thing. And I think that's a dark path. I mean, having done that in my life, I think that's a dark path. And I would tell anybody who wants to do their own thing, man, doing your own thing is really fun for about 3 months. Then there's a famine in the land and you're going to want to come home.
There's that third person of somebody who is honestly lost their faith because of somebody was abusive, or the church just was not welcoming to them, and they're questioning, and they're just like, well, if that's what Christian faith is, I'm out.
Yeah. When we're talking about legitimate trauma, yes. But for a lot of us, we get hurt by Christians. And I wanted to say, can I just remind you, we are a community of sinners. I've never heard, it's funny, I've never heard somebody leave an AA, an Alcoholics Anonymous community, because alcoholics are too hypocritical. Nobody's ever like, I am leaving that Narcotics Anonymous group because they are just they are just the most broken, hypocritical people in the world. No, you go because you're a broken hypocrite. At what point in Christian history it shifted to where the church is not a group of broken hypocrites? I don't know where when somebody says the church is hypocritical, our number one response would be, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the church we are fundamentally broken and flawed, but that's what makes us who we are. We are broken people in the hands of a profoundly gracious and loving God. This is not to baptize trauma at all. We're talking about two different things here. Trauma, abuse, completely unacceptable. And for somebody who has been traumatized or abused in a church, you need a good counselor. You need people to come around you to support you, and you probably need to leave that church. We just need to make sure to not conflate all things into the same thing.
Right now, I have these 18 and 19-year-olds I'm discipling. I'm trying to shepherd, and some of them come from, these Christian, primary and secondary school backgrounds, Christian private schools that are just full of hypocrisy and craziness, run by well-meaning people in some situations, but the structure, how it's run, kind of makes a mockery of real spiritual practice. And so I have kids deconstructing from that angle, but they're still there. They haven't given up on the faith, despite all of this hypocrisy they've seen. There's something about Jesus that's keeping them there. There's something about community that's keeping them there. I have kids who are raised by really devout parents that are also extremely dysfunctional and abusive, but they've seen something about Jesus that's keeping them there. They haven't rejected it. And so it's encouraging for me to see that, because I also have kids leaving for whatever excuse they want to pull out. You hear them all.
There's an excellent little book by, I shouldn't say little, it's not little, but there was a book written by a guy named Michael Polanyi. He was an Eastern European scientist. He wrote a book years ago. He was a scientist. He wrote a book called Personal Knowledge that's actually had kind of a really big impact on epistemology. Philosophers have been kind of returning to it. It's had a bit of a renaissance. It's a book about how all of science, at the end of the day, any act of scientific inquiry is, at the end of the day, an act of faith. He makes the point that when we make some scientific claim, we are having faith in our senses to understand it. We are having faith in the instruments we are using. We are having faith that the peer review process got out all the bad stuff. I mean, we even say, when we talk about science now, we talk about believe the science. It's like we're talking about it in religious terms, right?
Yeah.
But he makes a point in the book where he says that when somebody stops trusting in one thing, they don't stop trusting altogether. They just put their trust into something else. So in psychology, sort of parallel idea is what counselors call transference. And transference is that when we have been really hurt by an authority figure in our life, if I was hurt by my father or my mother or my pastor, I don't stop trusting in authority. I just put my trust in another authority. It's transference. I want to say to young people who may be sort of turning away from Jesus or turning away from the church, and I want to say, like the disciples did to Jesus, where are you going to go? What is better than Jesus? What is the thing? I mean, are you going to tell me that the vision that atheist Sam Harris has for the world is better than the vision of Jesus? Are you going to tell me that the scientific worldview of the universe offers a more compelling vision than the guy who died on the cross for the world? Are you going to tell me that religious institutions should be more trusted than the God of the universe? Something like that. My point is, at the end of the day, when people stop trusting in Jesus, they don't stop trusting in things. They just start trusting in something more. And often our trust in God and the Bible and the church becomes dislodged because we begin trusting some podcaster we've started listening to, or some YouTube clip that we listen to, or there's a brilliant book that just came out by Brian Zond, Everything is on Fire. It's a book about deconstruction and doubts. And he tells a story in one of his interviews that he did about this young woman who came to him in his church and she had been listening to this podcast, and she came to him and said, why do we have to believe that Jesus has to be God? Why do we have to believe that? And Zond has this brilliant approach. He says, well, here's why. And she, of course, this woman had been listening to a podcast that was making the case that Jesus didn't have to be God. He was just a good dude and all this stuff. And Zond says, he goes, well, here's why we believe that Jesus is God. Because the people that spent 3 years walking with him know Jesus better than you do. And they know Jesus better than any podcast you could ever listen to knows Jesus. So who are you going to listen to? The people who died in order to declare Jesus, or some podcaster in the year 2022 who just had some interesting thoughts about why Jesus may not have been God? Who are you going to trust more? The apostles or your podcast? And what I think that illustrates is we all trust something. This is not like there's some people who have faith and some people who don't. My friend Tim Mackey at the Bible Project says, it's not the difference between faith and reason. It's the difference between faith and alternative faith. We all have faith in something. So what do we trust more than Jesus? And for a lot of people who are deconstructing right now, they're doing it because they have more faith in something else other than Jesus.
I think back to what, maybe one of the first cases of deconstruction in human history, which is the Garden of Eden. Satan presents this, did God really say that? That right there, he's immediately engaging what she believes, and he's kind of trying to poke at it a little bit. And then he goes, well, no, you won't really die. He doesn't want you to eat it because he's withholding something from you. So right there, Eve is given kind of a binary option between trusting that even if she doesn't understand why God's doing everything, he has her ultimate well-being in his best interest, or her ability to discern her ultimate well-being for herself. Yep. And she takes trusting in herself that she'll be able to discern that for herself. And sometimes I think that is like kind of the binary option on, like, why are we deconstructing? Are we deconstructing because we have legitimate questions about a God who is extremely complex, ultimately has made himself known, but there's a lot there? Or are we deconstructing because we want to know him more? Or are we deconstructing because we believe we can know more and we can know better for ourselves?
We could talk, Brendan, for hours about Genesis 3 and the moves that Satan employs, or the serpent employs in that chapter. So it's striking, right, that the first thing he says, did God really say? And it's not, the serpent does not come and attack what God has said. He just asks a question, did God really say that? And then immediately after that, so he provokes a question, but before you know it, the question has turned into an accusation. Certainly, or a statement, certainly you will not die. Certainly you won't die if you eat from this tree. D.A. Carson, in one of his books, just brilliant. He says, the very first doctrine that the devil denies in the Bible is the doctrine of judgment. It's the doctrine that there will be a judgment. When he says, you're not going to die, he's saying, don't worry about the end. You do you. There's no judgment. If it feels good, go with it. Now, there's an argument to be made that a lot of our progressive secular outlook on life right now is a retweet of the sentiment of the serpent from Genesis 3. You do you. You're not going to die. Don't worry about it.
I've met many young people who, what they're frustrated with is the arrogance of absolute knowledge that they've experienced in the church. And so what I see happening, what's ironic, is now they are arrogant in knowing that they are right.
That is, in the medical world, my dad's a doctor. There's a difference between a good medicine applied in a good way and a good medicine applied in a bad way. You can apply good medicine in the wrong way. That's not a reflection on the theology as much as it's a reflection on the people who had that theology. And again, you can have a belief structure about God that to the modern world is offensive and still be profoundly generous and kind. Right? I mean, as a Christian, as a theologian, I'm totally convinced that Scripture is crystal clear. Jesus is the only way. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. He is the way to God. And that's a hard thing to say in our world because it sounds judgmental and mean, but it doesn't have to be that way. Actually, the fact that I believe Jesus is the only way should make me humble because it means I'm not the only way. Jesus is the only way, and I'm not. And so in a way, we've got to be careful to not apply good medicine in bad ways. We need good medicine, but done in a good way. And thank God that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, I mean, these are key ways that we should do theology in the 21st century. If I'm doing theology and I'm not gentle about it, then I'm doing God's words without the Spirit of God.
We were in this tribe and they were so absolutely sure of themselves. And so we're like, I'm out. Now I seek another tribe that are absolutely sure of themselves. And so what I see is, these podcasts and these social media posts over and over again. Deconstruction is the way to go. Boom, boom, boom.
Oh, man.
We have to doubt this. We have to doubt this. And
there are most people listening to this right now who are in this deconstruction doubt conversation probably feel so incredibly torn between two absolutely horrible options. Because the two options are, on one hand, this sort of conservative fundamentalism that looks down on questions and doubt and says it's evil and bad, and if you do it, you're probably going to hell. And this other side that says if you're not questioning your faith and doubting and pushing against what the church has always taught, then you aren't a good human being and you're just a racist and a bigot and all this sort of stuff. People are torn between two horrible options. One demonizes doubt, and the other valorizes doubt and gives it merit badges. And I want to say, what about the way of Jesus? What about the way of Jesus that says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus, who in the midst of his own emotional, personal turmoil, who had, by the way, two criminals on both sides of him. It's almost like our moment in history where you've got both sides on us. The middle way that says, in the midst of my own crisis of doubt and not knowing, I'm going to call out to God. The answer in this conversation is not to the right or the left. The answer is to go down into Jesus, to go deeper into God, and to resist these two extremes that demonize doubt and valorize it. Because doubt, friends, I got to tell you, some of the most important moments of faith for me have been walking through seasons of questions and doubt and faithfully walking with Jesus through it and coming out the other side and seeing God's hand of faithfulness in the midst of it. And honestly, I wouldn't be who I was if I didn't have some valleys that I was called by God to walk through. We walk through the valley of the shadow of death. We don't get to walk around it. We walk through it.
I mean, I completely agree. It's, the most formative experiences you're going to have in your life are going to be the valleys.
Yep.
My faith wouldn't be what it is if it weren't for the valleys God had me walk through. And, steel isn't strong unless it's tempered, unless it's put through the flame, unless it's given this chaotic process. And I think the Bible says similar things about our faith.
I'm with you, Brendan. I'm with you. I'm struck at how much suffering the New Testament is willing to show us that Jesus endured. The incarnation is God's response to suffering. He doesn't send a text. He doesn't send a book. He doesn't send a tweet. He sends himself into the suffering. That's his response. He goes to it. I don't want to suggest that we should valorize suffering, but I wonder if being a Christian entails not running away from the difficult stuff, but running to it. It seems to me to be the model of Jesus.
Right. And then we sing songs, you said one of my favorite quotes, the book is filled with great quotes, but on page 180, you said, whenever we sing songs that say things like, God will never let us down, I want to take my son out of the room.
Oh my goodness gracious. Oh.
Because aren't we setting people up who think that the Christian life is supposed to be all this hunky-dory thing, and no wonder they have doubts.
Ultimately, every tear will be wiped from our face. Yes, eternally, God does not let us down, but that does not mean we get everything we want during our human existence. And when we sing those songs, you're never going to let me down. I love the song. It's so catchy. But sometimes the worst theology is the most catchy theology, is the most catchy. The worst worship is the most catchy stuff. If you think following Jesus is one long chorus of self-fulfillment and getting everything you want, the cross is not the center of your faith. The cross is the eternal message that even God does not get everything he wants. He is willing to die to himself for the sake of the world. So I love that song. That's the problem with that song. I love it.
Well, it just sounds so true as well. It's like God is so great. He would never let me down. And
he is so great. That's why he'll let me down.
He'll let us down and he'll let us down and he'll still be just as sovereign.
Absolutely.
Right? And things going wrong is not actually them going wrong. His sovereignty exists around all of that.
And he lets us down, and he turns all those things that are down to the good of those who love him and be called according to his purpose.
I mean, just this past week, and this is just a short digression, but this past week I was doing a lesson for my college students that went so well. I recycled it and did a mini version of it for my high schoolers, where we just read a couple of Psalms of lament. And I said, guys, you understand the single largest category of Psalm is lament. And we just read through a couple of them. And I was like, do you guys see any parallels between these and the worship music we sing? And they said, no. And I said, exactly.
Oh my.
and,
right there.
And I said, have you guys ever prayed like this? No. Why not? Do you think it would be helpful to pray like this sometimes? Yeah. Just this stuff that we just are afraid of, and we shouldn't be. It's in the Bible.
Yep, I'm with you.
Thanks for joining us, AJ. We really appreciated the conversation.
Oh, my goodness. Well, for anybody who's listening who's read my book, thank you. And anybody who hasn't read it, shame on you for not reading my book yet. Read it.
Yes.
Because
it's all about shame.
Shame is the great motivator for all of us. No, you guys, thank you for having me. What a gift. And thanks for the work that you're doing serving college students. And God be with you, friends.
All right. Thanks.
You as well. Thank you, AJ.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Take care. That was great.
That was a good one. That there's a good one.
This is a paperback book, 190 pages roughly. Dense as all get out. It's one of those books that it's like,
that's awesome.
He is a good writer, first of all. And second of all, every single page has another illustration that bam nails it. How can he think through all these things so deeply like this? That's why it takes so long to read. It's one of those deep books.
I believe it. It's really encouraging that there's people like him out there on fighting the good fight out in Portland. Wherever else. For real though, he's the right person to be doing that, man.
Planning a church. He planted a church in Portland. It's like,
yeah. Did you know who else did?
Who did that?
Mark Driscoll. Mark, I hope you're listening.
Mark,
your biggest fan, Mark. Please come on the podcast.
Mark listens. He texted me the other day, said, I love that podcast with Bruce Ashford. Man,
that
Bruce Ashford was awesome.
That emergent church stuff is so cool. Man. Yeah, we really need the 4-chapter gospel down here at Trinity. So Mark Driscoll has a southern accent too. But that was a fun one.